Well, hey, good morning, everybody. How are you all doing? Everybody's back from fall break. Welcome back. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors here. Again, welcome to Community Church. The first service that we do in Greensburg, and we're live streaming the sermon over, and we're live streaming this right now for those of you watching online. Welcome. And that's fairly new technology. I'm still kind of getting used to that myself. And I was thinking this would be a lot more interesting of a time if we could drop a green screen behind us when we're up here. A green screen's what they use in movies to kind of put people in whatever environment you want. Like, I don't know, here's an example. Let's put up the first one. I could be in front of the White House, right? Wouldn't that be cool? Or the Vatican, kind of giving this message. Or, I was watching Rachel earlier and thought, man, it'd be cool if we could put her in front of Madison Square Garden. I think she'd rather be at Woodstock, but something like that. And then Scott, if you know Scott, our Greensburg campus pastor, he's a big Buckeye fan, so I thought, let's put Scott here in the big house. He might burst into flame, but that's okay. It's what you get for being a Buckeye fan. Anyways, hey, again, my name is John. I'm so grateful that you're here today. As Seth mentioned, we're in the middle of this series called Scary Stories. That we tell ourselves, so aptly named for this time of year. And what we've been looking at is as scary as haunted houses can be, and as scary as those like 10-foot statues people put in their yard now, which when did that become a thing, right? As scary as those things are, the truth is we all have scary stories that we tell ourselves that just aren't true, but yet they still scare the bejeebers out of us. So I would encourage you, if you missed the first two messages, go online, give those a listen. Seth did such a great job talking about a few of the scary stories we tell ourselves. And Seth also mentioned when he started this series that he doesn't mind scary things, like he doesn't mind a haunted house. Or I just want to be honest with you as we go into today, I do not like scary. Horror movies are not my thing. I remember once in high school, I saw one of those Child's Play movie. Anybody see a Child's Play movie? It's got that scary doll Chucky. I didn't sleep for weeks. I'm a real wuss when it comes to scary things. Even the cornfield scene in E.T. kind of freaks me out every time I watch E.T. So we're going to look at something this morning. I got to be honest with you. It is super scary. In fact, I'd submit to you that what we're going to look at today is maybe one of the scariest stories of all that we tell ourselves. And I'm telling you this up front because it's a little horrific, it's a little frightening, and it might need you to buckle down, right? It's going to be a bumpy ride. In fact, some of you might just want to go ahead and grab the hand of the person next to you for comfort. It doesn't matter if you know them or not, right? They're still going to provide some comfort. But we're going to look at a headline, several headlines that are ripped from today's pages, ripped from social media, that when we read them, it makes us lay awake at night wondering if that same tragic fate waits around the corner for us. So I just want you to brace yourself a bit. Parents, you may need to have some difficult conversations on the ride home with your kids today. But, all right, here's the first headline. Here we go. The average American only has $87,000 saved for retirement. All right, it's more scary for me than it is you. Let's go to the second headline here. Credit card debt in America is over $6,000 a person. That's crazy. No? All right, let's put the last one up. The average cost of living has gone up 37% over the last decade. Please make it stop. Now, I'm guessing just by your reaction, thanks, Brent, I appreciate that. I'm guessing by your reaction that wasn't quite what you expected, right? My lead up into it maybe had you waiting for something more, so you're a bit let down, even though you enjoyed holding the hand of the person next to you. Let go now, it's just creepy and weird. But as anticlimactic as those headlines may seem, right? They didn't scare you at all. As anticlimactic as that may seem, I just want to gut check us all as we start this morning. I want to gut check us with just how scary this story is. Right? So let me ask you, don't raise your hand, but let me ask you. How many of you have laid in bed at night worried about how you're going to pay the bills that come in the next month, or your credit card statement, or your mortgage? Oh, it got quiet real quick. How many of you have made a large purchase and then you've got buyer's remorse, right? And you get that big pit in your stomach, wondering if you should or if you could afford what you just bought? We know that finances are one of the top 3 stressors when it comes to marriage, and one of the top 3 causes for divorce in our country. How many of us have had difficult conversations, even arguments with our spouse when it comes to how we should use money as a family? Got super quiet in here. That's awesome. How many of us have sat down and tried to do the math on sending the kids to college or what it's going to take for retirement, and our eyes end up rolling into the back of our heads because we don't think there's any way that's going to happen? And maybe my favorite question of all, why, when a pastor gets up on stage to talk about money, do our walls go up and our ears shut down? Well, I would suggest to you this morning that one of the scariest stories we actually tell ourselves is this: when will I ever have enough? When will I ever have enough? Enough for the bills and enough for me to do what I want to do, or for my kids to do what they want to do. Enough for all the toys I want to put in the garage. Enough for retirement. Enough to live like that TikTok star I've been watching, or that Instagram influencer. I want to experience life how they see it. Enough for me, enough for her, enough for them. When will I ever have enough? Right? It is a big problem. It's a scary story we tell ourselves. And fun fact, by the way, some of you know one of my roles here at Community is overseeing our administrative and finance functions, so I know my way around a spreadsheet a bit. Did you know that about a third of the conversations that people have with me in my pastoral role end up being about finances? A third. Right? Sure, it starts as a discussion of how can we make our marriage stronger, or how can I discern God's will for my life, but inevitably, a good portion of those conversations end up being about money. Because we all wonder, when will I ever have enough? Second fun fact for you this morning. I think that this question, this scary story, it's been around since the beginning of time. And I actually think it's rooted in 2 of the biggest issues we face as humans today. In fact, remember Adam and Eve in the garden, right? And God provided everything they needed. He said, all this is yours except one thing. And what was Satan's implication when it came to the conversation with Eve? You sure that's enough, Eve? Don't you need more? Or maybe King David, as he was up on his rooftop one night, why have just one wife when that one looks good too? When will I ever have enough? Or taken to the extreme, his son Solomon, why have 2 wives when you could have hundreds? When will I ever have enough? And even Judas Iscariot, think about this. Jesus was sitting across from him face to face saying, I'm going to give you life to its fullest. And he still thought, I don't think that's enough. It's a question that's been around since the beginning of time. And again, I think it's rooted in 2 key issues that are embedded in the question itself. The first is this word, I. Right? So here's a hint. When we're at the center of the question, that might be a problem. We might not want to look at it the right way. And then the second word that's the problem is enough. Because it's how we define this word, it's how we define enough that'll eventually lead us to our answer. And see, here's the thing. Just like Adam and Eve in the garden, we can have all of our needs supplied. We can have more than enough, but we still look around this world and want more and more and more. And we search for it, and we try to fill ourselves with everything we can, but the reality is, and we all know this, that so often enough never seems like enough. And so this morning, we're actually going to look at a well-known story that we have preserved for us in the Bible. And as we look at that, I think we're going to find that scary story doesn't have to be as scary as we make it, but we can learn some lessons by looking at the story and the people involved. In fact, if you have your Bibles with you, we're going to be in Exodus chapter 16. Maybe if you have a smartphone app, turn there with me. I'll have it up on the screen so everybody can follow along, but we'll be in Exodus chapter 16 this morning. Now, I just want to give you some context before we start, because that's going to be really helpful in understanding the situation. So, the story that we're going to look at this morning is early in the nation of Israel's history. In fact, it's like early. They're just starting out. If you remember the story of the nation of Israel, God called a man named Abraham to go to a distant land by faith Abraham followed, and then we've got stories in the Bible about his son Isaac, and then Isaac's son Jacob. And then Jacob had a son named Joseph that we read amazing stories about. And after Joseph, the whole family came to live in the country of Egypt. And if you remember, they grew and they multiplied and they became so big that the Egyptians said, we got a problem. And the nation of Israel, as it was beginning to form at that time, actually experienced 400 years of slavery in Egypt. 400 years. And so the story that we're going to look at this morning is less than a couple months after they've left Egypt and come out of slavery. And that's really important context for today, because here's the interesting thing about what we'll look at today. Just over these last couple months, the Jewish people, they had seen the power of God firsthand. They had seen his care and his love for them over and over and over again. But here's the thing. They still didn't trust him about tomorrow, right? They had seen, remember that whole 10 plague thing in Egypt, including that last one where every firstborn in Egypt died in one night? And then Israel waltzed out of Egypt, literally waltzed out with all kinds of wealth, because the Egyptians were like, here, take our money, go, just please leave. And then the nation of Israel traveled, they were at the Red Sea, only to be trapped by the pursuing Egyptian army. And what did they experience? God split the Red Sea, they walked through on dry ground, only to turn around and watch that Red Sea collapse on the Egyptian army. And then as they're traveling through the wilderness, they're following God by a pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night. Again, they had experienced and seen God's power firsthand with their own eyes. Yet they were struggling to trust God when it came to the tomorrow, right? When it came to the unknown and what lie ahead. And sometimes when we read these stories, we think, well, that's kind of crazy, right? I mean, don't they remember what God just did? They just seen that weeks ago. But spoiler alert, I think we've got a lot in common with the nation of Israel right now. Because for so many of us that are in here today, we too have experienced God saving us. You too have seen God show up in your life time and time again as he cares and loves for you. But yet, for some reason, we still struggle to trust God with tomorrow. We struggle to have faith in the unknown. So as we look at the story today, I think what we'll find is we can see a lot of the Jewish people in ourselves. And maybe we'll be able to address this scary story of, when will I ever have enough? So we're going to start in Exodus chapter 16, reading in verse 1, if you look with me. It says that the whole Israelite community, they set out from Elim, they came to the desert of Sin. Now, that's not sin in how we normally describe and know that word, but it still sounds pretty ominous. And they're between Elim and Mount Sinai. And it's the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. Again, 6 weeks. It had been 6 weeks since they came out of Egypt. And here's what happened. It says that while they're in the desert, the whole community, right, the whole Israelite nation grumbled against Moses and Aaron. I always love when I read the word grumbled in the Bible, because I can kind of see them grumble. Aaron, by the way, is Moses' brother who was helping Moses lead. And here's what they're grumbling about. Here's what the Israelites say. If only Moses, we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt! Exclamation point. I mean, because at least in Egypt, we sat around pots of meat. And at least in Egypt, we ate all the food we wanted. But you know what, Moses? You brought us out into this desert. And now we're going to starve to death. You brought us out here to starve. Now, let's be honest. Having food's a problem, right? You need food to survive. You need food to live. And so there's about 2 to 3 million people here wandering through the desert. That's a lot of mouths to feed. I'm pretty sure any food they brought with them out of Egypt probably run out a long time ago. So it is a real issue, but I don't know if you're like me, you kind of read this and feel like it's a bit dramatic how they're saying it. In fact, we believe that Moses wrote down the history that we have recorded for us in the book of Exodus. And so sometimes when I read verses like this, I imagine Moses remembering, I imagine Moses' face, and maybe even Moses writing this down going, we're going to starve to death, Moses. Oh, poor is us. You know, I'm sure it was frustrating. I'm sure they were whiny, but again, it's an issue. They need food to survive. And so here's what happens next. The text reads that the Lord said to Moses. Now I want to stop real quick just to point out, it doesn't tell us anybody went to God and said, hey, we're starving here. Or anybody prayed, hey, you could really help us out here, God. No, God sees our needs, right? God sees and recognizes our needs, and he's proactive in trying to meet those. Here's what God said to Moses. He said, I'm going to rain down bread from heaven for you. Now that's super cool in and of itself. Bread from heaven, and I'm not just sprinkling it. You're not going to get light precipitation of bread. I'm going to rain it down. And here's what I want people to do. I want them to go out each day. I want them to gather enough for that day. God says, in this way I will test them, and I'll see whether they're going to follow my instructions. But that's not all. He's got a few more instructions for them. Here's what he says. On the 6th day, they're going to prepare what they bring in, and that's going to be twice as much as what they gather on the other days. So this is so cool because God, again, shows his power and provides supernaturally, right? It's an obvious, miraculous way that they're going to eat. No doubt about it, this is only by the power of God. But just like when God provides from us, there's some instruction that comes with it. So for Israel, the instructions were pretty clear. I want you to gather enough for one day. In fact, Moses gives them an exact measurement for one person for one day, and he says, I want you to eat it all in just that day. Except, by the way, on the 6th day, you need to gather twice as much, and go ahead and prepare it for tomorrow. Go ahead and boil it or bake it and make it into bread, because 7th day, God had already anointed as the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day we're supposed to rest, a day we're supposed to focus on him. But God provided for them. But that's not all God provided. He goes on to say, I've heard the grumbling. I've heard you complaining. And so at twilight, you're going to eat meat. And in the morning, you'll be filled with bread. And then you'll know that I'm the Lord, your God. So God provides for them in two ways. He's going to give them meat in the evening, and then he's going to give them this bread in the morning. Presumably, you could eat the bread all day. And take note of this last sentence here. He's not doing this just so they can know he's big, all-powerful God. He's doing this because he cares. There's a personal nature to it, because I'm the Lord, your God. We don't have a God who created the universe and kind of sits back and watches it spin. We have a God who's personally invested in our well-being. He wants what's best for us. And so the story goes on and says, sure enough, that evening, quail came, it covered the camp, and in the morning, there's a layer of dew around the camp. And when the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. And so when the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? For they didn't know what it was. Moses had to explain it to them, that it's the bread the Lord has given you to eat. And so the quail come in at night. That's how they're getting their meat. And then in the morning, this is super cool. Like the dew evaporates and there's like this stuff on the ground. We read later in the chapter that it was white like a coriander seed. It actually tasted like wafers made with honey. And best way I can describe it, it's like supernatural flour, right? It's supernatural flour laying on the ground. They could gather it up and bake it or boil it to make bread. And they didn't know what it was because it hadn't been seen before, probably hasn't been seen since. And so they just said, what is it? In fact, the Jewish word for this phrase, what is it, is manna. That's what we usually refer to it as manna. It just means, what is it? In fact, in your own Bible reading, if you want to liven it up a bit, I'd encourage you, every time you see the word manna, just go, what is it? It's a lot of fun. Here, let's try it. Every morning, the Israelites ate manna. Use a little bit more inflection, but you got the point. That's super fun to make your Bible time more fun. Anyway, so they're gathering this manna, and they've got bread. Moses gives them an exact measure. Again, enough for one person, enough for each day. Eat it all. Seems pretty clear. But here's what the story tells us. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses, and they kept part of it until morning. And then it was full of maggots, and it began to smell, which is pretty gross. So they had clear instructions from God to Moses, and then Moses had made it crystal clear to them, each person, enough for one day, finish it all. So why did they disobey God? Right? The instructions were really clear. Why did they either gather more or maybe just keep it on their shelf thinking they might need some in the morning? Why didn't they trust God's provision for them? Well, I got to be honest, I think it's maybe one of the same reasons that we always want to gather more or try to store stuff up as well. Because of this question. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? Right? Who knows? We're always worried about the worst case scenario. And for Israel, they were worried about what tomorrow would bring. So they held on to some for the next day. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we shouldn't worry about tomorrow. I'm not saying we shouldn't be wise and prepare for the what ifs. But here's the key in this story. Israel knew what tomorrow was going to bring. They already knew. God had told them, I'm going to give this to you every day. You don't need to worry about tomorrow. I got this. But they still went out to get more. So you might be thinking, well, that's great for Israel in this story, but how do we know? Right? How do we know what God has for us today, or maybe what's being wise and storing up for what tomorrow may bring? How do we know if we'll ever have enough? And that's a great question. And so let me ask you, when's the last time you asked him? When's the last time that you asked God anything about money other than, could you please give me more? See, here's the thing. If we want to know God's will when it comes to our lives financially, then we got to invite him into the discussion. We need to ask him. We need to pray and look for guidance. In fact, we look to God for guidance in our prayers on everything else, right? Our health, our jobs, our families, our spouses, our kids. Shoot, some of us even pray for our pets regularly. But let me ask you, when's the last time that you asked God about money or what his financial plan might be for your life? I'm going to take a wild guess here and say that probably hasn't been very recently, or maybe even never. And why is that? Why won't we pray to God about money? Why won't we ask for his direction when it comes to our finances? I think it's maybe because we're scared of what he's going to tell us. Because it goes back to that scary story we tell ourselves of, when will I ever have enough? And you know what? When it comes to that question, we'd prefer that we are the ones that answer it. We'd prefer that we are the ones that define what enough really brings. So we're hesitant to ask him. We're hesitant to know what his desires are for our money. And Israel's in the same boat here, right? They were keeping stuff that God clearly told them not to keep. But listen, God is faithful and provides despite our distrust. Here's what we read in the story. It goes on to say, each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed. And when the sun grew hot, it melted away. Going on. It says on the sixth day, just like God told them to, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers. That's the measurement they were supposed to get. 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. See, God continued to provide despite their distrust, despite maybe their lack of faith and wanting to hold on to it. And one thing I love about this story is, even though God provided for Israel, they still had a part in it, right? They had to go out and gather it. They had to go out and get it and prepare it. On the 6th day, they had to prepare it for 2 days. And just like that, when God provides for us, we have a part in it too, right? With whatever employment he's led you to, well, guess what? We need to show up. We need to work hard. You reap what you sow applies to more than just other areas of your life. We make the money that we work for. And then you don't see the Israelites like casually or mishappily throwing around the manna. What is it? Right? They were careful with it. They didn't burn it in the fire. They didn't have big manna fights outside. No, they needed to use it wisely to meet their needs. Just like with whatever God's given us, we're supposed to use it wisely too. That's just being good stewards, being good caretakers to what he has entrusted us with. But even when we know God can provide, and even when we know that we're being good stewards, there's something in us that just still wants more. Here's what happened with Israel. It says, nevertheless, some of the people still went out on the seventh day, on the Sabbath, when God said, no, you're not going to have it. And they found none. Now, here's what's funny about that. It's not like they didn't know if they were going to eat that day, because they had gathered it the day before. It literally was on the shelf in their home, ready to eat already. But yet, they were a little greedy. They still wanted to get more, just in case it was there. What if? When will I ever have enough? And aren't we the same sometimes? Right? Many of us have enough, or we even have enough for tomorrow or many tomorrows. And we know that God calls us to rest. We know that God wants us to get healthy. He wants us to invest in our relationships, and our family wants to invest in our relationships with Him. But out the door we go, ready to gather more, looking to put more and more and more up on our shelves. And why is that? Again, it's that scary story we tell ourselves. When will I ever have enough? And so how do we tackle that? Right? As we've read this story today, how do we begin to take this scary story and put it behind us? The two problems that we talked about earlier that are in the question itself, I actually think that gives us a hint for how we start attacking this. First is the word I. Right? So again, when we're the center of the question, I lost my balance there, sorry. When we're the center of the question, then we tend to be the center of the answer. And then we choose usually a pretty selfish response. And so our first step is to remove ourselves as the center. Our first step is to say, God, I'm going to give this question to you. I'm going to let you define when I'll have enough. And then that second word of enough, well, we give that to God. We let Him define what that is, no matter what the answer is. And we take this scary story, and instead we take a prayer to God. And here's the prayer. Help me to trust you for my needs, God. Help me to care wisely for what you've entrusted to me. Right? I want to discern what you have for my life when it comes to money, when it comes to my employment and my income and what I have on the shelf. I'm going to listen to what you have for me, and then at the same time, with whatever you've entrusted me with, help me to use it wisely. Help me to be smart and knowledgeable about the resources that you've given to me. God, help me to trust you for my needs, and help me to care wisely for what you've entrusted to me. And you know, in order to do that, in order to actually take our scary story and turn it into this prayer, it takes a relationship with Him. Right? Because in order to trust someone, you have to have a relationship, which means we also need to communicate regularly with Him about money. Not sure if you know this, but the Bible actually has a lot to say about what we should do with the resources we have. In fact, there's over 2,000 verses in the Bible that give us instruction on how we should use our money. But we won't know that instruction unless we actually pick it up to read it. And then we need to make money and our resources and our financial plan a regular part of our prayer with God. Right? If you're here today and you're struggling, well, bring that to Him. Tell Him what your concerns are, what your needs are. He wants to listen and provide. If you're here today and you have enough, well, shoot, then thank Him regularly and ask Him to continue to allow you to steward what you've been given well. And if you're fortunate enough to have more than enough, ask Him what He wants you to do with it. Ask Him what His plan is for that, because my guess is it might not be just to keep it on shelves and jars. We need to regularly communicate with Him. We need to regularly read our Bible so we can entrust God with our money now, and we can be wise stewards of what we have going forward. You know, at the very end of this chapter, there's a couple really cool verses I just want to close on as we wrap up, because how we handle our resources and our trust in God can be a testimony to our faithfulness of trusting him and his faithfulness to providing us. Here's what we read at the end of the chapter. Moses said, God commanded us, take an omer, take a measurement, and keep it for generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness. Going on, when I brought you out of Egypt. So the next verse says, as the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put manna with the tablets of the covenant so that it might be preserved. It's one of the few things they kept in the Ark of the Covenant. Why? Because it was such a powerful testimony to how God provided for them, for generations to come. And guess what? When we entrust God with our finances and money, when we model that, it's a testimony to generations to come on how we can trust in God. See, it wasn't just a one-day thing or a few weeks thing that God provided. We read in this chapter that the Israelites ate manna 40 years. 40 years, imagine that, 40 years. Each day, God provided for their daily need. We can trust him to provide. We can trust him with our money, and we can trust him to help us plan our financial future. Would you join me in prayer? Dear Lord, I thank you for the story of Israel here, and I thank you just how you provide for us, how you have our well-being at heart, how you love us and want to care for us, and that takes us trusting in you. It's so hard to do. That scary story echoes in our heads, and we always want more. Help us to put that scary story behind us by turning to you, by reading your word, by talking to you, by taking time to listen for what you have to tell us back. Help us to trust, knowing that you have our best intentions in mind. Help us to trust, knowing that you can provide. It's in your name we pray. Amen.